I did spend the weekend in Arizona going to what was an extraordinary event in so many ways. And I've been trying to understand what happened, how Charlie Kirk could have been assassinated. Some of that is just a practical question of how someone who'd received so many death threats, how someone who knew the dangers he took going out in public could have been assassinated. There's just some practical questions there. But then the larger question of how people in the country are experiencing it so differently. I was so grateful to have the opportunity to go cover that event and to talk to so many people who'd come from all over the country to be there, whether they were able to get in the building or not. They were so happy to be part of it. And there was a joy at such a sad occasion to be there. The reaction to it all has been so confusing to me, particularly for people on the left. And I continue to hear from Democrats who I know, some viewers of my work on Two Way or viewers or listeners to this program, who continue to say, even post-funeral, boy, I'd never heard of Charlie Kirk. Or, boy, I'd heard of him, but I didn't know much about him. And they so rarely evince any understanding, and I say that with a broken heart, of why Charlie Kirk meant so much, not just to the president of the United States and the vice president and so many members of his cabinet and his administration, but to people around the country. I've said before Charlie died, and I talked to him about it directly on my shows, there was no Democratic version. There is no Democratic version of Charlie Kirk. And that has some practical implications. There's no one who played at his level in dealing with the political world or media in such a diverse way. But there's no one who was the beating heart and soul, the spirit of a movement. And there are some smaller movements in the Democratic Party, right? Bernie Sanders, AOC, talking about post Barack Obama. But there's no movement on the left like MAGA. And the entire Republican Party, almost without exception, is now part of MAGA. And Charlie Kirk was central to that, and such a well-liked guy. And so the immediate aftermath of his assassination, we saw appreciation and sadness and anger on the right of people who not just knew Charlie Kirk was, but knew him either directly because they were his friend, and I met so many of them in Arizona, or they felt they knew him because they listened to his show or they watched him at Turning Points events or events with the president and others. And then so many Democrats who would denounce violence, but didn't have appreciation either for what Charlie Kirk meant to the MAGA movement or for the positive aspects of him. What they wanted to say was, well, we denounce all violence and we denounce some of the things Charlie Kirk stood for in their view of what he stood for. So since his death, since his assassination, we've continued to see an unfortunate split, not just in the reaction to his assassination, but in the reaction to the reaction. And the most stark thing is Jimmy Kimmel and how his suspension for a time was seen differently depending on who you were. And then, of course, complicated by the fact that a lot of people on the right said, well, I don't like Jimmy Kimmel, but I don't like the fact that the Trump administration has kind of gotten involved there with the FCC and the president speaking out. But this is in the immediate aftermath of the assassination, people paid lip service to, well, this is an opportunity for the country to come together, an opportunity. And we don't see many examples of anyone taking advantage of that. So often, there are people I talk to on the right who look at the media, along with other liberal institutions, but particularly the media, as the main culprit in dividing the country and in driving many people into the arms of Donald Trump. Talked about this for a decade. There are people who vote for Donald Trump who don't like him, don't agree with him on a lot of policies, although maybe agree on some, but don't like his style, don't like the way he conducts himself. That's so common. But they often say they're for Donald Trump because of the liberal media bias. They just can't tolerate it. And the only way they can see to send a message of the need for change is through voting for Donald Trump, supporting Donald Trump. It's interesting because we do see some big changes. We've talked about them here. Elon Musk buying Twitter, turning it to X. The new owners of CBS, friends of the president. There's now talk of this deal for TikTok that would involve TikTok being largely in the control of entities friendly with Donald Trump. All this is massive change, but you still hear so often from folks about the bias. One of the things I love about hosting programs on Two-Way is I hear from people around the country. Sometimes there are people who come back on a regular basis and I kind of know their point of view. But this past week, or I should say earlier this week, had a woman come on named Carrie from Chicago. And just sometimes you hear from an everyday American and they sum things up. And I want to play for you what Carrie from Chicago said when she came on Two-Way and talked about the parallel she sees between the coverage of the decline in Joe Biden's mental acuity while he was president and the coverage of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So let's listen. This is just a woman who called in on our platform. Anybody can come on the platform and raise their hand and get called on to ask a question or make a comment. This is Carrie from Chicago. This is clip S4, please.
So I think what I found during the Biden administration, and once I started watching independent media, was this frustration over all these lies that the media was telling me, that the mainstream media, dominant media was telling me. And there was this watershed moment. Everybody remembers it. It was the night of the debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, where Joe sat with his mouth agape, and looked like the walking corpse. And the next day, it felt to me as if the heavens had parted. All of the news media started saying he's not fit, he's not right, he's not okay, he's not who we thought. And this is after months and months and months of being told that he was sharp as a tack, that these were cheap fakes, that he was okay. And so I really thought after that moment, this is it. This is going to be the moment we finally have honesty from the media, and the mainstream media is going to start being honest again. And that lasted all of about 2 weeks. When Charlie was murdered, I think I had sort of the same reaction that I had after the Biden debate when the media started being honest for a couple of weeks. I thought finally, we're going to finally have an honest conversation about what's going on. And there's no possible way that anybody could spin the assassination of Charlie Kirk into anything other than what it was. Wow. I couldn't have been more wrong. Not only was I horrified by the people celebrating the assassination of Charlie, but the disgusting attempts to spin it different ways. And I'm not talking about far left people. I mean, NBC News this weekend came out saying there's no evidence that the shooter had any ties to left-wing groups. Jimmy Kimmel saying he's MAGA. Montel Williams on CNN saying that they're star-crossed lovers. ABC's Matt Gutman saying, they were sharing touching texts. And the lying is just making me absolutely insane.
Yeah. Such clarity, emotional clarity, intellectual clarity from Carrie. I feel that, as we often say on Two-Way, she speaks for tens of millions. And the Biden thing is so instructive, and we've talked about that so often here. Here was the press exposed during the debate between Biden and Trump for years of colluding with Democrats in the Biden White House on Capitol Hill to failed for so many Americans, but try to cover up Joe Biden's loss of mental acuity. Then the debate happens, and all of a sudden, the emperor has no clothes. Everybody's talking about it. And then, as Carrie points out, the press just went right back, not just bias generally, but a failure to acknowledge the media's own role in what happened. And then, of course, you had with the Tapper Thompson book, et cetera, a accusing of Democrats, but not an acknowledgement of the media's role. So then we fast forward to, the events of a few weeks ago when Charlie was assassinated. And I thought, as Carrie did, that, well, okay, this will be a moment of clarity for the press and for Democrats. They don't have to endorse Turning Point USA. They don't have to say that, Charlie Kirk is their hero. But Carrie expected, as I did, for there to be some consciousness raising, for them to be an acknowledgement to demonstrate an acknowledgement of the pain being felt by followers of Charlie Kirk, including the president, to set aside their anger over January 6th and Donald Trump's policies, and not to try to erase history, and not to say, everything's forgiven now, or the ledger's clear, or we're all just the best of friends, but to rise to the occasion. Instead, and it really wasn't even a day, characterizing Charlie Kirk as a right-wing activist, cherry picking things he said that they found to be negative, mischaracterizing things. This has really affected people like Carrie. I heard it down in Arizona. Not angry people in Arizona, because everybody there was so lifted up by the event, but just saying, how could this be? And part of it is the media. Even though Charlie went out of his way to talk to so-called mainstream reporters, the collusion, the conspiracy of camaraderie between the media, the dominant media, and Democrats has not been broken, even though there have been, as I said, some developments that have changed things. It's not been broken. And on Sunday, the very day that the president and the vice president, many members of the cabinet and the administration, and tens of thousands of people gathered in Arizona, watched on television, watched online, even on that day, you saw in vivid display the media, the dominant media, and Democrats once again displaying a lack of understanding, a lack of sensitivity, a lack of appreciation for what the assassination of one of the most important people in MAGA meant. And I'll say again, had that been a 31-year-old overachiever who helped to elect, say, Barack Obama as a Democrat, and that person had been assassinated by someone who killed him for the words he uttered, I don't think you would have seen the Sunday shows devoted the way they were, not just to allowing Democrats to criticize Charlie Kirk on the day he was being commemorated, but to talk about lots of other topics, to not cover very much of the ceremony live, and to cover things that are significant. Kimmel, allegations against Mr. Homans, there's all sorts of issues to be covered. But on the day that a genuine hero was being celebrated, to let this happen. So now let me tell you a story. It's about a guy named Leo Grillo. He was on a road trip and he came across a dog. It was a Doberman who was severely underweight and clearly in a lot of trouble. Leo rescued that Doberman and he gave him a name. He called him Delta. Sadly, though, Delta was just one of many animals that needed help, which gave Leo an inspiration. He started something called Delta Rescue, the largest no-kill, care-for-life animal sanctuary in the world. Delta Rescues saved thousands of dogs, cats, and horses from the wilderness. They always provide their animals with shelter, love, safety, and a good home. This dedication and everlasting love for animals, that's Leo's mission, and it's Leo's legacy. Delta Rescue relies solely on contributions to operate from people like all of us. So if you want caring for these animals to be part of your own legacy, speak with your estate planner, because there are tax savings and estate planning benefits too. You can grow your estate while letting your love for animals live well into the future. Check out now the estate planning tab on their website to learn more and to speak with an advisor. We call a dog man's best friend for a reason. You can help those who need it most. So please, right now, visit deltarescue.org to learn more. Again, go for more information to deltarescue.org.